Buenas and Hafaday, Hamzu Todos, Guahu Si Rita Pangolina Nauta. I serve as the Managing Director of Guampedia.com. Sizus Maasi for joining Guampedia and the University of Guam College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences with the support of James Viernes at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, Baltazar Aguon, and Jay Castro. We partnered to produce this virtual community outreach program series, Culture of Connecting, in response to the new reality shaped by the global pandemic, the profound crises sweeping across nations, and the sobering reminder that many of our Guam's World War II survivors have since passed on. During these times of crisis and uncertainty, we can definitely look to our past and the wisdom of experiences of our Manana to navigate these uncharted conditions. You can go, Laz, to the next slide. And what better place to cultivate this culture of connecting than in the kusinan sanhiyong, the outside kitchen. In fine Chamorro tradition, the kusina serves as the gathering place for families and extended families, more than just to share meals, but to share stories, discuss family matters. And if you grew up in the Marianas, the outside or back kitchen was always the place to be, as foods were always being prepared from petizas, kadunpika, fritada. There's always something in the mix, and there's always definitely an abundance of conversation, lively conversations about familia, from current events to family lineage. To this day, it serves as a space for connecting and sharing the Chamorro way. Some of my fondest memories as a child took place in our back kitchen, from making a pigigit to coconut oil, langanizok, or making cerisas tomorrow. The food always tasted better in the back kitchen, but even more so, my familia gathering together, working while catching up with each other, to enjoying the fruits of our labor. And even during the cleanup stages, it truly cultivated a sense of belonging for me, a space that young and old gathered and worked together to make a feast for everyone to enjoy and appreciate. It served as a Chamorro family's classroom, if you will, to learn family history, costumbre Chamorro, and how to make great dishes. So let's go to the next slide. So welcome to our Kusinan Sanhiyong conversation. This is program 3 in our 4-part series. Program 1 focused on our overarching theme, which is Fanhasu, War for Guam. Hasu means to think, to remember, to reflect. And although this was a very short period in Guam's history, this World War II living legacy changed our island's cultural landscape significantly and almost literally overnight. Our featured guests shared how our World War II survivors and their stories helped shape their perspective at this time in Guam's history, and how they were inspired to cultivate connections in their respective life journey and identity. Dispensa Day, my dog is barking. I think I have a visitor. I am in my back kitchen. Anyhow, knowing the history of our familia through our manana is also a way to finding a sense of personal identity. Knowing the history of the place where you and your family come from, it can instill a sense of upbringing, of belonging, a sense of pride. It helps to understand our history of place and to see ourselves as part of that story. So through our conversation across generations, our World War II Mananas accounts exemplify their enduring spirit of resilience that is rooted in faith and familia. Hearing the stories of those before us can inspire us to take action in our own lives. Our past can have a huge impact on our future, and we need that inspiration to teach us that. We learn from our past mistakes as well as our past successes. Last week's program, our program 2, delved into those roots of faith and familia and how culture and values formulated our Manana's response to a war not of their making. From one colonial power to wartime enemy occupation, this war brought sudden, drastic, and permanent changes to life on Guam. It echoes what we all have been experiencing and thinking about these last several months. Uncertainty, immediate and drastic changes. Pa'u hatgomo, agupa ti agupa'u. This proverb speaks to how today is all we have, as tomorrow does not belong to us. During that heartfelt conversation we had last Monday, the wisdom and insight of these truths that are based on life experiences tell us that when all else fails, instead of wondering and worrying about what tomorrow will bring, today, let's look at our mañana, who came before us, who also suffered from pandemics and survived war. Look to them for their wisdom and their legacy of resiliency. These conversations have drawn on stories of suffering, triumph, highlighting the coping skills, resources, and cultural values that became the tools for survival when all else failed. These conversations illuminate just how important our past is in approaching the life-altering impacts of the last several months. In recentering the human experience of World War II on Guam through our mañana's perspective, it serves as a bridge to our youth's past and a bridge to their future. And so our conversation today, Dispensa, let me just grab some water here. So our third program out of the four, our conversation today is aimed at cultivating a culture of connecting past to present. It focuses on the Lancho, or the ranch, or familial communal gathering place that was a place that island residents fled to when Japan invaded Guam and was considered the primary means of survival for thousands of families throughout the occupation. Professor James Perez-Viernes, he'll be your host for today's conversation. And again, we'll have our Sina, Tony Malia Ramirez, to Ina, or Give Light, to Chamorro Cultural Concepts. And we also feature floral artist, farm and business owner, Simeon Palomo. He'll share a special story he wrote of his parents' war experience at their respective Lanchos. And we also have two graduates from the class of 2020. Guampedia's very own Lazaru Kanata, graduated from UOG with a degree in sociology and Chamorro studies. And Carmelo Nauta, graduated from Southern High School in the class of 2020. And both Lalahi grew up on the Lancho. And so before I turn it over to our host for today's conversation, I'd just like to highlight a few sections in Guampedia and our website that can serve as resource of stories for the perspective of our World War II survivors. Of course, our special section, Fanhasu War for Guam, and it features we have 52 war survivors and a series of written entries, photos, and videos that can give you insight to this period. These recollections have been captured through Historia, historical research and images, and Historia, oral history, to help people make meaningful connections to history of place and sense of place. It requires education from different perspectives, scholarly, historical, and cultural, as well as on-site visits that provide firsthand experience of the power of place. Using archival research, oral histories, and video technology, Guampedia has been partnering with the community to document and provide access to these stories covering historical subject matters from Guam, for Guam from a Chamorro perspective. We also have an extensive overview of the role of Lancho since its inception in the 17th century through Itampunguera. These and other entries, about 1,200 of them, are always available to you at any time. All you have to do is click on Guampedia.com. So now, let me turn it over to our back kitchen host, James Perez-Viernes. He identifies himself as being from the village of Santa Rita, a descendant of a long lineage that leads to Sumai, but he's currently in Honolulu, Hawaii. And I'm gonna just share his favorite Chamorro dish is padut lalu. I'm not sure if anyone's really familiar with this special dish. It's always been something that his mother's sister, Antijuana, she was the specialist in this particular dish. And one of the reasons why it's a favorite of his is because it required a lot of hands to build, from the fire, or if you have to do it really fast, the gas burner, but even roasting the beringanas, preparing them, cooking it, peeling it, gathering the doni, and doing everything else so that Antijuana would mix it just to perfection. And all of that sweating and burned fingertips, when all of that was said and done, and the dish is all ready and presented, it was an opportunity for James and his cousins to sit down in Auntie Juanet's back kitchen, to catch up, to laugh, to discuss whatever challenges the family was facing, and just be together. And so, although he doesn't have Padut Lalu, do you have Padut Lalu with you, James?
Not today.
Okay, well, you can take over from here.
All right. So just my century, after day, everybody, and just to reiterate, on behalf of Guampedia, welcome to the back kitchen. I'm very happy to be asked to participate today. As Rita was mentioning, our focus is Lancho, survival and sustainability. In the context of World War II, which we're celebrating the end of in these months that we call, I guess, liberation season, but also in the context of a lot of the things that are going on today, whether it be COVID, whether it be the economic challenges we're facing, whether it be our own personal trials. We want to take a minute to kind of focus on this idea of Lancho, this space that has been important in understanding Guam history, but again, important in surviving and figuring out our present. And today, before I turn it over to our distinguished back kitchen guests who will share with us their encounter with the Lancho, I do want to set a bit of a historical context. I'm a historian by training and profession, and so I think it's important for us to look back a bit and understand what it is this Lancho is, what it's meant to us as a people, how it's had to change to ensure our survival. And how we will have to change it in the present as well, as we forge through some of these issues that we're facing. And all of this that I'm gonna just try to put in a nutshell here is all available on Guampedia. Highly encourage you to go down the rabbit hole in Guampedia and just kind of explore where these articles and links take you. But in the context of the Lancho, prior to the arrival of Europeans, there's no term Lancho in Guam and the Marianas, but the land and the sea prior to the contact with outsiders, or what we can call sanhiyong, the land and the sea were essential to our survival. People wanted to eat, so they needed to grow it, they needed to catch it, they needed to fish for it, they needed to slaughter it. And so in that context, the land and the sea have always been central for the very practical need of survival, of eating, of sustaining ourselves physically, sustaining our children, and sustaining our clans. In that context, the land and the sea are very important for us as a people in the context of barter, right? Producing enough to feed ourselves, but also some excess to trade for the things we didn't have or the things we didn't produce. So if you came from a clan that had access to really good fishing grounds for a particular type of fish, you could take some of that catch and trade it with another clan that was maybe had good land for growing taro. And this is how the economy pretty much worked in the Marianas. It was not an economy of producing excess and selling. It was an economy of sustaining yourself and then creating a bit of excess to trade for what you couldn't produce. But I think more importantly, when we look at the Lancho in this context, it was more so important in our practice of tsunsuli, right? That we could grow, we could farm, we could fish, to feed ourselves, to trade for what we needed, but also to produce enough excess so that we could give to the people that we shared obligations with, to give during their time of need. Today, a lot of, when I was teaching at the University of Guam, Guam history, I would ask the students, what is tsunsuli? And they would say, oh, it's an envelope. And I say, that's one form of tsunsuli, but that's not what we need to understand tsunsuli of. Tsunsuli is a gift of, could be money, but in the longer span of our history, it was always things like food and labor and service and presence. And so the land and the sea allowed our people to do this, to produce enough excess food to give to others during times of need. So I just kind of want to frame the Lancho in that sense of, yes, it's practical, but at the same time, it allowed us, continues to allow us, the ability to uphold this very strong practice of tsunsuli, of giving during others' times of need. And this embodies our overarching, our cultural philosophy of inafa maule, to make things good. And one of the most important values that we have, rooted in what's called gefto, which I believe our Saina Malia will speak about today. We need to look at the land and the sea in this context of, our connection as a people. This is all going to change when others come in with other ideas about what the land and the sea mean. Okay, when Spain comes into the Marianas, what we see is the desire of Spanish Catholic missionaries and colonial officials, the desire to control Chamorro people, to take them away from their matrilineal clan lands and put them into villages, right? The way we understand villages today, with homes built around a church, right? This need for the Spanish to watch us and control us, to make sure we weren't sliding back to our old ways, to make sure we were being good Catholics, to make sure we were living up to Spanish standards. The Spanish moved Chamorros away from their lands and their sea into these villages surrounding the church. But Chamorro people don't give up on their worldview as easily as colonizers would want them to. What we see happen during this time is that while the Spanish forced Chamorros into these villages, many of them retained ties to their ancestral lands and continued to return back to those lands, to farm, to fish, to continue to provide for their sustenance and for their participation in the Tsunsuli system. But I think when we look at the Spanish period, what is most profound for me is that the Lancho goes from being practical to being a refuge. This becomes one of the only ways that Chamorros can get away from the watchful eye of these foreigners, to get away from all of this change that's being imposed on them, even temporarily, even if it's just for the day or for a few days, to go to their Lancho and just get away from everything that the outside is imposing, right? And so it becomes this refuge away from what is a very traumatic time, right? Where their religion, their sense of economy, their sense of connection to land and sea are constantly being under threat. And in the process of taking refuge in the Lancho, these Chamorros are able to sustain their Chamorro-ness, right? They're able to speak their language of the Lancho without worrying about getting in trouble from colonial officials. They're able to sing their songs. They're able to maintain their own ideas of gender roles, where women and men carry responsibility to the clan. And that's important because every colonizer that comes in has been patriarchal, has had the idea that the man is the head, right? In the Lancho, what we see is women and men continue to share a very distinct gender order, right? We see the Lancho as a place where Chamorros can transmit their own values to their children, to teach them about Tsunsuli, about the value or the script of behavior we know as mamala, to teach them about what it means to be a Chamorro, what it means to be a part of a clan. And so what we see during this time period of change is that the Lancho actually becomes the primary residence. Chamorros more and more start going to their Lancho and staying there day after day, night after night, and only going back to the new villages probably on Sunday just to attend mass because it's required, right? They're spending most of their time in the ranches. And just to quickly summarize, I mean, when the United States comes in, this throws everything on its head again. I think really for the Spanish, as long as Chamorros were Catholic and following the law, they really kind of left them to their own devices at the Lancho, whereas the United States was very frustrated with the fact that Chamorros were spending so much time at the ranch. The United States Navy saw Guam as very fertile, and so viewed it as, when they saw Guam, they saw dollar signs. They said they can grow more and more and more and sell and turn that into profit, and that would make the Chamorros productive and successful. You know, for Chamorros in the early 20th century, they really had no use for money, right? As long, again, Is they had enough to feed themselves and their families and to give of their families through the Tsunsuli system. There was no need for money. There was nothing for them to buy. And so this created a frustration with the Navy that, you know, they wanted these Chamorros to participate in a capitalist economy. And so what we see happen here is that Chamorros find a way to survive this change and this imposition. They say, okay, you want us, you're gonna force us to pay taxes, you're gonna force us to pay for all these licenses to get married, to own a dog, fine. What they did is they created a dual economy. Many of the elder siblings in a family would go and get wage jobs where they could to pay the taxes for the family, while many of the younger siblings stayed on the ranch with their parents to sustain that subsistence living. And so really this leads up to what Rita was talking about during the war. A lot of Chamorros fled back to their ranches and kind of stayed there. And bringing us into what our speakers are going to kind of address is this post-war period, you know, where Chamorros kind of held on to the Lancho and adopted part of the American economy, but still held on to their own. There was really not much of that choice after World War II. The 1946 Guam Acquisition of Lands Act essentially opens the floodgates for the United States to begin taking any and all land that it saw necessary to do what it wanted to do in the Marianas, and that continues today in the present. Some families were fortunate enough to retain their Lancho, to retain some parcels of their land after the war, but for the majority, they simply weren't able to do that. And after World War II, 94% of Guam is working for wages, right? And so in the absence of land, the more that our land and access to our ocean has been taken for us, the less and less we've been able to rely on that land and that sea to sustain us. And now most of us, as you know, we all have jobs. We're not necessarily working on the Lancho. But what I think is important is, despite all that, despite all of these outside attempts to force Chamorros to move away from their land, to move away from the spaces that allow us to be who we are, we found ways to fight against that. I think back, if you can go to that next slide, actually, I think back to my own personal memories of growing up with 29 first cousins in our family compound. And I remember, I think back as far as I can remember, and it brings me back to a place that we always call Guampedia's Ranch. My maternal grandfather, Antonio Borja Perez, had a little plot of land next to his house in Santa Rita. You know, he maintained this land. He would raise roosters for cockfighting. Over the years, there were pigs. Before my time, I'm told there was a cow or two, some vegetables being grown up there. And this Lancho, our little family ranch, Guampedia's Ranch, probably nothing like the ranches that our grandparents grew up on. But for me, in that early 1980s, Guampedia's Ranch was huge, and it was the most exciting thing in the world for me and my cousins to go there with him every day, whether we were helping him feed chickens or when we would camp out there in the summers. We played there, we got spanked there, we did everything at the ranch. And now that we're adults, we've kind of had to look back at the ranch, and that was our refuge. We learned how to take care of each other there. We learned how to respect our elders and the land. And the land sustained us then, and it still does these many years later. As adults with children of our own, we're looking back to those times on the ranch to help teach our kids, you know, what our elders taught us, because our elders are no longer around. And so, you know, with that, I just kind of want to set that context and open up the discussion to our guests today to hear about what Lanchos they're sustaining in their own lives today. What Lanchos offer us in the way of promise, right, in surviving some of these difficult times that we have seen, some of the most difficult times since World War II. So with that historical context, I want to turn it over to our back kitchen guests who can share with us their Lancho, their sustainability, and their survival. Thank you. And I believe we are going in the order of seniority. So it is my honor to turn this over now to our Steina, Tony Malia Ramirez, who will talk to us about the Lancho survival and sustainability. Malia?